The villagers then explained to Mark what had happened while he was at war. The following is based on a ghost story in Thailand. Sometimes in the 1800s, there was a woman named Nak and a man named Mark. Nak was known to be one of the most beautiful women in their village, and Mark was known as a person with courage. They fell in love at first sight and married a year later. Their love was incomparable, and they were well known in the village for setting great examples for the youth. Nak became pregnant just a couple months after their marriage. However, also during that time, a war broke out and Mark was drafted to enlist in the military and had to leave his wife. Mark was scared for his wife, who was going to help her around the house and be there when she delivers their baby. Nak told him to not worry about them and for Mark to just come back home unharmed. Mark had no choice, but was hopeful that they will be alright, and so will he. Mark was at war for a year and a half, and finally the war ended. Mark also made a friend, and also saved his life. For that, his friend volunteered to accompany him home as a token of gratitude. As Mark and his friend returned to his village, Mark notices how unusually quiet the villagers become, as half the villagers had moved on to another village. When Mark got home, he notices his neighbors had also left, but Mark was determined to see his wife. Mark called for his wife, and she came out with their baby in her hand. Mark introduces his wife to his friend. His friend was happy for both of them, but also very suspicious. Every house here looks abandoned, even theirs. Mark advised his friend to stay for the night and rest at his aunt's house, who had passed away a year ago. His friend agreed, as it has been a long day. The next morning, Mark and his friend went to a local market to buy some food. Some of the locals noticed Mark, and their eyes began to widen and refused to sell anything to Mark. That night, Mark, his friend, and Nak had leftover fish. This was the first time that his friend really got a good look inside of Mark's house. There were spider webs in every corner and dust in every part of the house, as well as their eating table and bowls. His friend started to catch on why everyone was abandoning the village, and he too was in a hurry to go. Mark offered his auntie's house for another night, but instead his friend asked Mark if he would like to spend the night with him as war brothers one last time. Nak was furious hearing that. She told his friend that he can stay there by himself or leave back to his village if he doesn't like it there. Mark was shocked because he never heard Nak yelled ever in his life. Mark's friend then agreed to sleep at the auntie's place alone, and Nak walked him out. As his friend was laying on the ground staring into the ceiling, he heard knocking at the door. He went to open the door and it was Mark. Mark said that Nak has allowed him to sleep over as she expected his friend to leave the next day. His friend came clean to Mark and asked him if he notices anything strange at all. But Mark doesn't seem to see anything different other than some people had left his village. His friend told him that his wife may be dead. Mark thought his friend was crazy for saying such a thing. Back in the older days, the older folks would say to check if someone was a ghost taking on a human form, they would have to look between their legs while being upside down. His friend commands Mark to do it without her seeing him, and then, and only then, Mark would know the truth. He warned Mark that he wants Mark to get away from here, and with him, if he would. But if he won't, then Mark will have to find the truth himself. His friend left the next day, leaving Mark and Nak alone in their house. A few days have gone by and Mark notices a rotten smell that comes from their food every day. Because there were no villagers left to sell food, he would eat their old food for Nak, as she had worked hard cooking their food every day. On the fifth day, Mark went fishing and brought back fresh fish for Na to cook. But that night, those fish too smelled rotten when displayed on the table. Mark doesn't understand but ate for Nak. As they finished eating, Nak was washing the dishes and Mark was playing with their baby in the living room, which is just directly across the kitchen where Nak was washing the dishes. Their baby had dropped the toy under the couch. Mark reached his hand under the couch, but it was too far out of Mark's reach. Mark was upside down before he knew it and suddenly remembered what his friend had said. He then decided to look at Nak, who was washing the dish directly from where he was. He then saw her skin was rotting from top to bottom, and even her mere bones were in sight. His eyes widened, and he also started to scan his house and notices all the dust from his house and all the spider webs in every corner. Mark breathed harder. He was in disbelief. He made a frightening sound, and Nak looked over at him. Luckily, he was able to pretend he was only searching for their baby's toy, which had fallen over the couch. Nak then came over and asked Mark what was wrong. Mark began shaking, telling her that their baby dropped his toy and he was just trying to get it. She went down, reached her hand under the couch and got his toy and returned back to do the dishes. Mark started to think how Nak got the toy when the toy was stuck at the far corner, which was not possible to get. His face started to turn red, and as he started to look around their house, he saw dust and spiderweb everywhere, as his house hasn't been maintenance in years. He tried to rub his eyes, but no matter how much he did, he couldn't unsee the truth. That night, when Nak was fast asleep, he tried to slip out. But as Mark was getting up, Nak woke up and grabbed his hand, asking where he was going. Mark explained that he needed to use the restroom. Nak volunteered to go with him, but Mark insists that she should stay here with their son in case he wakes up. Nak trusted Mark and allowed them to go outside. It's been a couple minutes and Mark hasn't returned. She called out his name and there was no response. She got out of bed and went outside to search the area, and Mark was nowhere to be found. She let out a scream and it echoed throughout the jungle. Mark knew that she was onto him, so he ran as fast as he could to the other nearby village, which was still miles away. Being a spirit, she caught up to him in no time and tackled him to the ground. He fought and managed to escape. Before his friend left, his friend gave Mark a special made rock. It's been said that after crushing the rock's powder can be used to rub yourself and you will become partially invisible, as the powder will help erase your scent from evil spirits. He quickly crushed it and brushed the powder all over himself. Soon, Nak became unaware of his presence. She began to go crazy, hitting trees in the middle of the jungle like a crazy person. Mark used this chance to get away and reached another village by morning. He told the older folks what happened, and the elder folks had to perform a ritual. After the ritual was done, Mark was asked to never return to his hometown village ever again. The villagers then explained to Mark what had happened while he was at war. Nak gave birth to their child, but passed away during labor. Nak was filled with hatred and rage that she came back as a spirit because she waited so long for her husband to return home. Upon her return, every night she would sing and her voice would echo throughout the villages. All villagers became so frightened that they abandoned the village. Only a few stayed, but soon left after they saw Mark at the local market that one morning. No one would dare tell Mark the truth because they were afraid of what she would do to them, just like Mark's aunt.